Like we're starting to get close to a quorum here. Notes in the chat for anybody doesn't happen to have them. I'm sure everybody does though. I'll go ahead and share. Figure that's easier for folks. All right. First thing I had on the list, I figure we can kick it off and go with the simple one first, and then we can get into anything more complicated later on, is the 1042, which that one, it's doing a couple small nits and tweaks. Like we got rid of the scratch descriptor function and turned into a couple variables previously. And so I'm just documenting what those variables were instead of the function that no longer exists. And I also ended up renaming a variable in there. I'll get to that in a second. The other thing, this is coming out of my previous PR, and I just pulled these out because I figured these were the least confrontational. I kept the language that we needed an array with at least one item in there just because that's in a lot of other parts of the spec. But I moved all the wording around must have a base layer 0 and in order and the file system structure and whatnot. I just moved all these items nested under the criteria that this is only when we're talking about the OCI image config. And so if we're talking about something other than that, then these requirements don't really apply because we're talking about an artifact rather than an image. And so these fields just don't apply to us. And then I just kept the language in there about the scratch layer, just rename that one again. So second place for that. That was a one of the linters triggered on this one. So that was a tweak that I had to do to get the CI to pass. Just had to drop the variable name. We weren't using it, so I just had to drop the variable name in there. And then the rephrasing that I did was to say, instead of scratch digest data, it's just scratch data. There's no digest in here. So that was the other small detail I changed. So I was hoping this one was easy enough, simple enough that we could just throw that one through the system and give it a quick thumbs up and just move on from there. Were there any objections, questions, concerns?
I gave it my meaningless approval, if that helps.
I feel like we should give your approvals more meaning. Should we make you a moderator?
No, then my approval would mean something, and that would be too much pressure.
I think the two with meaning would be Sajay and John. I see you both kind of going back and forth off of mute.
This does change the array requirements to must have at least one, right? That kind of like got in there, which is not there before.
It put that in there in this place because we had already had in there in two other parts of the spec. And so I was getting that in there because it was ambiguous here, but it was not ambiguous in other places.
If we add this now, it would be a breaking change to remove this later.
For image spec.
Right.
I feel like it's already a breaking change if we removed it now.
It depends on where you look, actually.
Yeah.
I think people who have more strong opinion on the image spec should probably comment on this.
Yeah, my feeling, guessing where you want to go with that, to be able to pass something without anything. Some of that goes into the next one. We're talking about artifacts. The other part of it that I would push for is to say that eventually we want to have a different manifest for artifacts at some point. It's just going to take a while to get there.
Yeah, I'm just having. That's like bullshit.
Sorry, I wasn't muted. I don't know if you picked up anything in my room.
Heard a little bit. I was wondering if you were going to comment on this or not.
That was my wife on the phone. Nope. Sorry, I just joined late. I'm like a customer triage thing, so I'm just catching up.
No worries. I'm not sure if Sajay was thinking about you specifically on that one. We're talking about.
I actually don't want to add a conformance to validate that the layers are present, because we don't have that, because that would break conformance, and it could mean that implementation should, or at least they should, they will expect a layer in there. Right now, no implementation Docker Hub, or at least a bunch of places don't actually enforce that. So putting this in there would actually cause it to create confusion in those places, what I'm more concerned about.
It depends on whether we're talking about the server or the client. Because if the client tries to push something without an entry in there, there are mixtures of servers. Many of them will reject it.
Right.
If the server starts requiring it, then that's a different question. Yeah.
No, but the moment you put in a specification saying that this array must have at least one entry, servers can enforce that this JSON schema is valid with, and you need to update the schema also, right? Like to make sure that this is a min of one, which probably is already there.
That's where I was getting ready to jump to, is that I believe that is already there in other places. So if we look at the JSON schema, that language was already there. So the image manifest. When I look at layers, min items is already one over here. So that's where I was getting at. We've already got other places of the spec, and we're just trying to get it consistent. We pull up the image for media types over here. This one also says that you have at least one layer right there.
And that's because of the schema that we kind of like followed along. I probably will defer to people who historically made that change into what direction they wanted to lean. The point is, I don't want this. My hope is that distribution doesn't have to validate this, because this is now a must on the specification language.
So it's, for me to say it's a must, it is a must on the tool that is generating it.
Yeah, and that's
I always look at like generate something conservatively and then potentially accept it more liberally downstream.
Could we be prescriptive that implementations creating these manifests must have at least one entry? Because I think that's the issue, right? Is that there are registries and manifests already that do not have layers. Yeah, or should.
I'm fine with either. Whatever the group wants to say.
I think the real challenge, which you've alluded to, is we don't say that this must have at least one entry. There's portability concerns between different registries. If an implementation chooses not to use at least one layer, registries could reject that manifest.
Currently, there are places which doesn't reject the manifest, and there are usage of Scratch images in places which doesn't have layers. So adding this would indicate that those are invalid. We've kind of gone down the path of trying to avoid things that exist as being invalid by changing the specification of 1.1. So if we did this, it would potentially be for consistency's sakes, only where the spec is, by making it consistent, we actually break. So that kind of like brings back the question as to whether this is a guidance versus a must language in this.
Looking at the other maintainers, I'm wondering if John wants to jump in at all.
I don't love that it's a must. I don't know. I would just drop that line. Like when that becomes a
Yeah.
must, then we have
We're back to ambiguous at that point.
Just for clarity, is the must line we're talking about 58? Is that
54.
54.
54? Okay.
58 exists already, but it's
Yeah.
kind of
That's
in-
why I was confused
yeah.
by it. Yeah,
got
got
moved.
it. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's so fucking weird.
So this is, the question here is basically like, do we want to codify what some 1.0 registries already imply? And by imply, I mean like will fail if there isn't at least one. We were just thinking about codifying it, but the must is very restrictive, so maybe we should not do that. I do think you like kind of leaves that door open, right? Like Brandon said, basically back to ambiguous, right?
Yeah, and the must here was codifying not just what some registries are doing, but also what is in other parts of the spec today.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I guess, John, how, if we drop that, how do we prevent that still being a problem? Not to put you on the spot, like, it's just that you had sort of said we should just drop that, but like, if we just drop that, then we have the problem that Brandon's calling out, right? Sorry, my throat's really
No.
weird.
Yeah,
I don't intentionally have vocal fry.
What if we've used language elsewhere and it's been a little controversial to say that implementation is concerned with portability, and then paragraph, right? Like implementation is concerned with portability must specify at least one layer.
yeah, I think I would, of course, be fine with that. Should makes more sense to me in that sentence, but maybe
Yeah.
must is more correct.
Yeah.
I the reason I kind of don't want to merge this as a must is that there's the possibility that we can beat some registries over the head to like change a very small amount of validation that would prevent this from working. And like people use this today, and I don't want to break them. I don't know, this seems like a small enough hurdle that having some language that's like, hey, if you don't have anything in here, it might not work everywhere, seems a reasonable cop out.
Would using should here sort of be like the thin end of the wedge to say that implementations like registries going forward really ought to support zero length layers, but not be fully prescriptive?
Yeah, I think we want to probably, whatever language you use should segregate like artifact producers from registry operators, where we want registries to allow zero entries, but artifact authors might, care to work with old registry.dev.
We also have container runtimes in that list too. So container runtimes might want to have a layer.
Yeah, I mean, like right now, I know of people who are using like a Scratch layer that has a bunch of like company specific, or a Scratch image that has company specific metadata, but 0 layers. And I don't want someone to read this spec and break them.
Right. I'm good with whatever wording. If someone wants to throw a comment on the line and say, change it to should, change it to, or, image producers, concern with portability, whatever phrasing we want to put in there. Drop that in, I'll get that updated. Anything else on this one, or should I skip on forward to the next one? Okay. So the next one out here was artifact type. This is the one we agreed to last week, which was we're adding a new artifact to the image manifest, new artifact field. I cut and paste a bunch of text around that. And let's see, I included the guidelines for usage. So I kind of have a little rough guideline / example usage down below. I then add a new media type, OCI Scratch V1, for whenever we use the Scratch digest. So instead of having it to be any arbitrary example string, I'm putting it to a very specific string now. And that's only when we have the Scratch. So that way, if you're reading a Scratch and you see that, you know that it's effectively a nil, that doesn't exist. And then in the guidelines, I have several examples here. So I'll show it without the comments so it's easier to read here. So I've got 3 examples, one with the typical usage that follows along with somewhat how Helm charts and other things are doing it, where they have a config and a data. They've specifically created the types for their content. They're actually passing stuff in there. The second example here is when they don't have a config. So this is, say, for example, you're uploading an SBOM. All you have is the media type for whatever that SBOM is. That's going to go over here. You're going to have the Scratch for the config. More than likely, the media type for that SBOM is going to be your artifact type as well, unless they've got some dedicated artifact type they want to pass. And then the last one was, if you just wanted to upload some annotations, you don't have anything else in there, you don't have a layer, you don't have a config, both those are Scratch, you should still, no, you must still have an artifact type in there. And that's how you can pass that. The must on the artifact type, I put that up above. So let's see here. When the config media type value must be set to a value specific artifact, yada, yada. And then I probably should uppercase this must over here, but if the config media type is set to Scratch, artifact type must be defined. And so that's saying if you didn't really define a config media type in there, you still need to define an artifact type at some point, somewhere. We need that data somehow. Questions, concerns, there's also a distribution spec change that goes along with this. Bunch of the rest of this just defining, here's the Scratch media type, updating the schema for the Scratch for the artifact type field, adding some test code with examples, fixing that same linter error on the validator, adding the artifact type field, yeah, and adding the Scratch media type. Thoughts on this one? Y'all are a quiet bunch today. Does that mean everybody's just going to hit approve on this?
Well, you can
Ship
have my
it.
meaningless approval if you want it, but but it's meaningless.
Same, +1, meaningless +1.
Jason, at some point here, you're going to get put as a maintainer. You're not going to get away with it.
No.
Sajay
I
and
threw in a
John.
question,
ahead.
but it's, you can ignore it.
What's the question?
That question that's right in the middle of your screen, right? Nope. It was just that comment there is, but I think that can just be a follow-up PR if we want to do that.
Well, I think my only pushback on that would be that it's up to the artifact designer whether it should have a config or not. Like we shouldn't say that it should have a scratch config.
Yeah, makes sense.
I'm not pushing anybody to have a scratch config at all. Especially like Helm charts and whatnot. They've already gone through the effort of making it. The distribution gets into, I'll jump over the other issue just because these are kind of tied together. And again, let me hide the comments just to make it easier to read. In this one, we've got the artifact type. I was trying to figure out in this phrasing here how to phrase properly a precedence. And the order of precedence here is when you're defining the refers response and you're building your descriptor list and you're looking at the artifact type of the manifest that you're building that descriptor for, we need to pull up, and originally we were pulling up the media type of the config descriptor when it was an image manifest. I'm changing the order of precedence of saying, if the artifact type is defined, pull that up. If it's not defined, fall back to pulling the config manifest, config media type. So that was the order of operations I was thinking of. Phrasing that, I'm more than happy for someone to say, here's better wording than what I was saying here to make it read a lot easier. But that was the goal of saying we're building a refers response, pull the artifact type first and fall back when that's not defined to doing the config media type. How's that sound effects? Now, Jason, you say you're just going to give a thumbs up. You actually did it. No, you didn't do the thumbs up. We can get you on this one.
1 second.
Can't we? Are you not on this one either?
I have no power anywhere.
No, that's going to get changed. I'm nominating you whether you want to or not.
Oh no.
We don't have VBATs here on this one, but John, how about you?
Reading it. I left one comment.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'll get that in. I'll pull it in as a rebase on my side. Sajay, how about you?
I thought I'd already approved it.
In that case, that's awesome. Thanks. Is everybody just exhausted from this going on forever?
My hope is we can get this in and get 9.9 in, and then
Yeah,
hopefully tag for the next RC or something. That's what I'm waiting for.
that would be a nice end goal here for me too. So these, getting those in. That was my hope of getting those before 999. Do we want to pass it over to, do we have more comments on this, or do we want to pass it over to the archiving artifacts question?
I don't have, I mean, we can discuss stuff about archiving artifacts. The current state is that issue was basically the artifacts repo as it currently exists is confusing to folks, as the term artifacts is confusing to a bunch of folks. And we should, I think it says delete the repo. I think we should archive it with a note at the top that says current guidance is over there in image spec. But I think that basically the work we're doing will be necessary to do that. All of Brandon's PRs will be necessary to make that state possible. And then we can hand it over and start the TOB voting process, which I don't know how or what timeline that will be on, but when TOB gets the question, they can ask us for more feedback, I suppose. But I think in general, if anyone here disagrees that we should get rid of the artifacts repo and archive it, speak and we'll discuss.
I don't know about I think that repo is something we need to deal with. I think there is kind of a sense that there's some work that's been kind of scooped off the table a little bit that needs to be picked up somewhere. I'm not saying that artifacts repo is a place to go, but like when I envisioned our working group process, I think we had, I don't know if we had the end of the working group kind of defined very well, especially for the references type. Like we got the references stuff done, and then this like artifact stuff kind of like squeaked in, and then got kicked out. So I think we do need to discuss at the TOB level what the, like where this work's going to go. Like, is it going to go back to a working group? Is it just going to be thrown off, just no longer an OCI? Does it need to go out to vague? Personally, I think that the artifacts probably shouldn't have been in the references group or the references working group in the first place. I think it warrants its own working group, and it can be kind of decided or kicked out at that point. But I think it's good to have like some continuation of that discussion. So it's not just seen as like end and out. But yeah, I think from my perspective, what the outcome of that should be is we have a working group to discuss artifacts, we archive that repo, and then we kind of, if the output of the working group is a new repo, I think it'd probably be a new repo, not a continuation of that one. But I just think it'd be good to have some, at least continuation of that work. So it's not seen as we're just like throwing that work away or not acknowledging what's been done there.
Yeah, definitely. Real quick, just, I know Aaron has his hand up, but I wanted to respond. I definitely don't want it to sound like the work is just like delete. I think the thing I would say is the advice in that repo should be subsumed into image spec, where I think it's more authoritative and more sort of official. I'm making finger quotes, but you can't see them. And yeah, I mean, if future artifacts work is happening, I'm fine having it in a new repo or in this repo revitalized to be about that work. But I think it's been a constant source of confusion for folks. Basically, anytime I see a link to this repo, I know that someone is about to have the wrong idea about what artifacts are. So yeah, thank you for your feedback. I'll give the floor to Aaron.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think we probably don't need to make a decision on this for a little while yet. I think it probably makes sense in terms of order of operations, as other people have said, is get the 1.1 release out with a good definition of the sort of the minimum viable artifact, which I think is what we're aiming towards. And then maybe update this repo to point at that current minimum viable, like this is what OCI 1.1 contains, but not closing the door, I think, on the possibility that something else picks up this work in the future, and just say, and then maybe in like 6 months or something, we decide okay, now it's time to put this thing to bed, or when another working group spins up or something like that.
I want to separate the effort to make a new artifact manifest, where I think there's still a goal to create that eventually, and archiving this repo. Because this artifacts repo was just saying, here's how you use the image manifest to package an artifact and to wrap it and ship it. So it wasn't talking at all about the new artifact manifest. So I want to make sure that we split those two conversations into two separate things. And I think there's
For sure.
still some progress we want to make in making the new artifact manifest. But for this one to say we're archiving this one is just to say that, hey, we've put a bunch of details about the image manifest using it to wrap an artifact itself that we've gotten over into the image spec. And so I feel like I agree with Jason that we're right about the point we can archive this.
So in general, I
Yes.
agree with Aaron that we're not in a particular rush to archive it. I would say that I am in a particular rush to clarify the current state of the thinking in that repo. Like, even if we don't archive it, we say the current state is we are working on this in image spec. Much of this guidance is on its way over, like, a single like paragraph in a thing at the top of the README, because we don't have to archive it, but every day that it's there, someone will reference it as if it is authoritative and up to date, and it is not authoritative or up to date. So that's my only urgency.
I completely agree with that. I think my preferred sort of proposal would be 1.1 release, make a PR to artifacts repo, updating the guidance here and pointing to OCI 1.1, but not archive it at that point, because I think that that would suggest, for example, archiving prevents any additional PRs being made against it, which I think is potentially not what we want if we need to update the guidance in the future. Or if, say, another working group spins up, we might want to have this be a pointer to it. Artifacting, archiving the repo makes it a little weird to do that, because we would have to go back to the TOD, I think, to unarchive it and then update the repo and then archive it again. It's like we could probably wait and hold off on doing that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, we've walked back from delete this repo to archive this repo, and I'm fine walking back to replace it as a living pointer to update up-to-date advice in image spec. Mainly the goal is to reduce confusion caused by this repo's existence and incompatibility with up-to-date advice. So I'm perfectly happy with that. I don't know if that means, I think we still need TOB approval, or like at least artifact repo maintainer approval to cut it down into a pointer to image spec at 1.1 advice. I'd be happy to do this if it means it doesn't require TOB approval, if we cut it down to something that doesn't require that level of process, because I think getting TOB approval on anything is probably going to take weeks.
I would be happy to take as an action item for myself to, I think there's some merit in keeping this repo and having this, this is a guide, right? The image spec is a specification, and this is a guide for how to use a specification. And I think I would be happy to take a stab at taking what we've got with Brandon's PRs and making a PR to revise this artifact authors guide, and hopefully get that merged in so that it reflects OCI 1.1 as we're standardizing it.
I think I would prefer that to live in the image spec repo, though. I completely agree about there being a value to like a human language, not spec language, but human language guide to how to do this and some examples. I think if we can put things in the spec, that is even better. But for things that are more like between you and me, without the spec maintainers here, you should really use this kind of string. That seems valuable. I do think that like moving that into image spec, which is a bit more well maintained, which is not something I normally say, but moving it into image spec, I think would be better. Like these maintainers, I don't think are very active in artifacts anymore. I don't know about like Joey Shore, for instance. I haven't heard his name in years.
Yeah, we've got Derek on the call here, so at least have one representative. But otherwise, I was going to say that we probably want to defer to the maintainers of this project first, and then only if that is infeasible should we bring that up to the TOB, or only if we're going to completely sunset this thing.
Yeah, I mean, we don't need artifact maintainers approval to add a human language guide to the image spec repo. We would need artifact approval to replace the content in here with a pointer to that guide in image spec. So their feedback, their input is necessary, but not
or
not
except
for
for
the first
PR.
step, only for the second step. Derek, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to point out that the reason this was created in the first place was because we wanted to pull this language out of the distribution spec. If the image spec wants to take it, I mean, that's great. But yeah, we just wanted to pull some of this stuff out. I don't know whether it's living or archived. Like, I don't know if it makes too much of a difference. I'm not sure what value the community is getting from some of the specific guidance, or at least some of the specific like pointers at the different types. But yeah, I'm fine either way. I just want to make sure that, you know, there's a continuation of that conversation, so we don't have to have it again.
If it's living and not archived, I would say we probably just want to delete a bunch of these files in here and just have a simple README that says this guidance has been moved over to this other repo.
I mean, archive seems to make sense. I mean, even if it's living, we can still, like, living implies that we're going to keep making changes, but if we add pointers and archive it, that seems fine. I'm not even sure we would need TOB approval just to archive it if the maintainers agree to it. But
That would be great. That would be totally fine by me. Not that I'm trying to like slip anything past the TOB. Many of the people I would be slipping past are already in this meeting, but the process of getting TOB to convene to make a vote has been difficult. So yeah, if you think this just requires artifact maintainer approval, then great.
Okay. Honestly,
And
it might be
I
easier to get TOB than all the maintainers agree.
maybe. I agree with what Aaron was saying, though, getting the one out and getting the language updated, and then figure out where we go from there.
Cool. Thank you.
All right, so I've got hopefully a few things to merge in with my changes and get those, a few things to accept and then tweak on my PR there. Once we get those merged, what are the thoughts on 999 getting that done?
I would love to rebase my PR 1030 once you merge yours and get a review, but I think no review comments have been made yet, and I've raised it on the past 3 or 4 calls. So I would love some feedback on clarifying that additional media types are accepted. For example, the artifact media type, we can't like have an allow list.
I think my hesitation on this one that I've mentioned before is just that I know that there are a fair number of registries that do limit what they accept. So we'll be saying a good number of registries out there just are not OCI compliant and never will be.
Yeah. Is that okay though? Right? Like, is it okay to have an OCI compliant registry that allows referrers but doesn't allow any actual artifacts to be uploaded?
I'll phrase it differently. It's allowed for a registry and not have the tag API and still pass a bunch of the OCI requirement, tests in there, because we're only testing specific APIs. And you can turn off on and off individual things that you want to not check on your registry. So it's a lot of what we've said elsewhere in the definition of the spec is saying, if you support this, here's the response code you're supposed to give back if you don't. And we give that definition. You know, it's possible to have a read-only registry. It's possible to have a registry that only accepts the OCI media types, doesn't even accept the Docker media types. And so to say that we're putting a hard limit in here that you're not OCI compliant if you don't allow any value in certain fields, and we know that registries today are limiting that, it gets me nervous.
So I think this goes to, I would love a review of the PR, because the precise language is that unknown media types should not be prohibited. So a known media type, such as registry saying that they want to ensure that all new manifests are using OCI instead of Docker media types, for example, for images, that would be permitted by the language. And I think that goes to, I think, the need to have a review. Again, I'm just raising that this PR has been there, and I've raised it for 3 sessions. So I would love a review.
Looking at that PR 1026, right? Is that the one we're talking about? Sorry.
1030.
Yeah, 1030.
So 1026 also has a very similar strong language, like implementations must support any media type. Whereas at the bottom, portability kind of like says should. This is also similar to how we kind of like spoke about an array must include something. Clarifying anything that changes the stance of from ambiguous to any kind of forced implementation will invalidate a bunch of folks. And I think we've agreed that we don't want to go down that route to force clients or servers to assume that a strong requirement of any of these is kind of like what should be conformant. I'm leaning to maybe renaming that as guidance at this point with a should rather than with a must support any media type. I know it's artifacts won't work unless it's a must. But we kind of said that this is where it is, and it's up to registries to decide whether they would support it or not. Or is your requirement that for artifacts to work, this is the only way forward, and hence it should be a must?
I think that without language in the OCI spec that actually specifies that non-image content has to be accepted in some form, then it is completely compliant. And this goes to sort of the portability concerns, right? If we're talking about, Brandon, you talked about ensuring that your implementations that might be behind an air gap or might be in an enterprise situation where they update very slowly, that if you cannot actually attach an SBOM, cannot upload an SBOM, cannot upload an attestation, cannot upload cat GIFs, whatever sort of media you're trying to copy from an upstream or external registry, this potentially fractures the ecosystem in that registry A may set a hard limit on, we will have an allow list. And what I'm trying to suggest is that it would be very beneficial for OCI as a specification to say, we don't permit registries to specify allow lists. A block list is okay, right? Like don't permit Docker media types, for example, and that would be some sort of advertised functionality of the registry. But you're not going to have portability of the types of artifacts that people are describing unless you specify it in the spec somewhere. And the language in this, and I've rebased my PR actually on top of yours, so there's 2 commits now, but the second commit just contains the changing some of the error, ignore language to must not generate an error, and also specifying that new media types should be accepted. again, this is the language here is that what I suggested, and I haven't gotten a lot of feedback on palatability here.
A bunch of it is good. I need to reread and double check a few lines in there. I suspect a lot of my concerns are more around 1026 actually.
Yeah, 1026 was that was the earlier one, right?
Yes.
I'm a little torn with that because this would mean that anybody who doesn't accept every possible config media type is non-conformant. But with artifact type being in the manifest, maybe that's the loose field that people can play with rather than the config media type.
That makes a lot of sense. I would be happy to amend this to not place this sort of this language on the config.media type. But I think the artifact type should definitely be arbitrary.
I think that's the way we've designed it. My suspicion is that the same registries that implemented a whitelist for the config media type are going to implement a whitelist on the artifact type.
Well, as we're defining a new field, this is our opportunity to say that we want behaviorally to allow lists or to allow block lists or what we want, right? And one of those is going to lead to greater portability than the other.
Yeah, given that it's a new field and if you use the extension logic, it should not validate what's in that field also. That's how the spec is written. So maybe easing that up on a new field is easier rather than touching the config media type because but we need to make the first PR in, right? Like Brandon, your PR for artifact type needs to get merged in. Okay.
Yeah.
I could also see someone just blocking anything that has the scratch for the config media type. It's not a whitelist, it's an explicit blacklist at that point. Sorry, bad terminology, but
yeah, reasonable. And I think we can have a conformance test if artifacts is supported. We can do these XYZ things, right? Like,
yeah, the challenge that I run into is that I definitely see where you're going with what you're trying to do, Aaron, and I'm there with you. I want to see this happen, but I also am trying to balance making sure that we don't put so many restrictions in there that nobody has an OCI compatible registry, and therefore the validation there becomes meaningless because there is none out there to look at. And just realizing that there are a handful of registries out there. Pretty sure Docker Hub is on that list. Maybe not, but they were for a while. I know GitLab is on that list of filtering. Quay was on the list. I think they took it out on their side. So just trying to balance all of that.
I believe as of the latest update on the exploratory information gathering PR is that none of the registries listed filter on the config.media type. And
of unknown values.
Yeah, and again, any OCI 1.0 compatible registry must, because the artifact type is not defined on image manifest, must accept any arbitrary artifact type today. So we don't risk breaking any current implementations requiring that implementations must accept unknown media types. And I think the word unknown there is intended to indicate that you may specify a block list. If there's some sort of malicious content or some sort of bad actor in the ecosystem, then of course they can take action.
I think it's GitLab who we don't have in our list that I know for sure. Saw a comment, and that was something that Docker was looking at on their side because they were trying to push the new. They were trying to use the image manifest as an artifact, like we're documenting here, and they got pushback from GitLab, and GitLab said, just open a PR, give us the entry in there, we'll review it, and decide if they want to approve it or not. But they're doing that on an individual basis. They're not going to do a open free form for whatever reason they have on their side. But if it's just the one and we want to say, okay, they're no longer OCI, then just one doesn't feel too bad to me.
I will amend my PR to clarify that the artifact type is where that arbitrary manifest media type rather needs to be accepted.
And I think that's the issue, isn't it? Yeah. that
Yep,
was the
just
one I was
bringing your
thinking of.
receipt for you.
Yeah. I remember seeing that conversation. Cool. Anything else? We give people back 5 minutes. Awesome. I'll get working on mine. Aaron, looks like you got a little bit of work on yours. And hopefully we can get this stuff merged here soon. Get some progress, get an RCI here before too long. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.